what we're seeing is that as things warm, as the winters warm, springs get pushed earlier, falls get pushed back, so that the overall frost-free season that you see is expanding, particularly in northern regions. So when you look at plants as a source of allergenic pollen, there are sort of three things that determine that. One is the season. So if the springs are starting earlier and the falls are starting later, then overall the amount of time that you're exposed to that pollen is increasing, number one. Number two is the amount of pollen. One of the things that we just looked at was working with about 17 different doctor offices, allergists around the world, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, and found that there is an actual signal that we're seeing in the last 20 to 25 years, where if you look at the temperature rise, that follows the change in overall pollen that you're being exposed to. So number one, you have an increase in the pollen season. Number two, you're seeing a greater amount of pollen. And then there's a third one that we're still trying to suss out, and that has to do with the role that carbon dioxide is playing in terms of the allergenicity of the pollen. You'll often hear that meme that CO2 is plant food, and it's true. But the problem is that CO2 doesn't distinguish between a loblolly pine and poison ivy. It doesn't distinguish between a plant that you find useful and a plant that is a weed. So when you start looking at how these interactions occur, one of the things that carbon dioxide is doing, in addition to simulating plant growth, is it affects plant chemistry. And part of that plant chemistry is a potential change in the allergenicity of the pollen itself. That there are at least two studies, myself is one, and the South Koreans have come up with another, showing that ragweed pollen, that oak pollen, are in fact having more of these allergens on the surface of the pollen. So number one, a longer season. Number two, more pollen. Number three, pollen that actually may be more allergenic. So all three of those things seem to be on the upswing. Now, what does this have to do with COVID? Pollen can cause, for sensitive individuals, everything from runny noses to asthma. It affects your respiration, right? It affects your breathing. And it also affects your susceptibility to respiratory viruses. So one of the things that we've been working on in the last few weeks, and we're still working on it, we don't have a conclusion yet, is to try and look at whether or not sensitivity to pollen may be an exacerbating factor with respect to things like COVID. It's not a surprise to anyone that about 300,000 people every year report food poisonings to the CDC. Those are the ones that are reported. I suspect the number's much higher than that. So when you look at temperatures and you look at bacteria in post-harvest, it's not a surprise to anyone that things like E. coli, Clostridium, Salmonella go up when temperatures go up. In addition, the amount of time that inspectors spend on things like meat processing plants goes down as it gets warmer. So we expect to see a change in food safety that may be impacting a lot of folks, and the need for greater inspections in that context. In addition to changes in the quality of the food that you consume. So different aspects of the food chain that affect your health are going to be impacted by the rise in carbon dioxide, by the change in temperature. And then in the natural world, as we've talked about, some of the work with pollen, but what about plant-based medicines? Many people don't go to the corner Walgreens to get their prescription filled. They rely on plant-based medicines. How are those going to change, both in terms of the potency of the medicine or in terms of the demography? Where is that plant going to grow in the future with climate change? But it's fascinating. There's so many different aspects of plant biology that affect your health. And, you know, plants are, the reason I chose this is that there's sort of this green background, this ubiquitous green background that nobody ever pays attention to. And yet they affect every aspect of your life, from the food that you eat, to the medicine that you consume, to the clothes that you wear, to the shelter that the wood made for your homes. I mean, there's so much of this that is part of the sort of topical or frontline areas that we concern ourselves with when we talk about climate change and public health.